sharing Alexandria's story and all the great work that's being done there in implementing green building policy. So we'll we'll move to question and answer session. Again, as I noted, at about 2:20, we'll be all experiencing emergency alert by way of our phones, and so we'll hopefully minimize our disruption. If you want to raise your hand, you can do so. I believe within the more, there's a button that says more and says raise hand. If you want to do that, I can recognize that you are seeking to ask a question of our panel. With that said, though, I'm going to start out here just to get the discussion moving. To start with Paul, real quick, just kind of with the current incentive structure that's in the 2020 Green Building Incentive Program, do you have any reflections on kind of the incentive kind of bucket or bin that's been most widely adopted or very used by developers within Arlington?
Sure. So, Bill, I think you're referring to probably going back to that summary table that we had up before, but showing the different levels of FAR. Most developers in the county are pursuing the lower levels of FAR, so the 0.25 and the 0.35, which still includes stringent standards and baseline requirements. As I mentioned before, the 0.35 FAR level does require at least a minimum of 3 extra list items. So looking at either renewable energy, extra EV charging stations, looking at offsite solar, on-site solar, anything along those lines, and I'd be happy to pass more of that information along. But that's the trend that we're seeing now in the current policy, is at the lower levels. Again, I think it's just based on height and either in the zoning ordinance of how much you can pursue extra, or just based on preference from the developing community. But it's a trend we've been seeing. Outside of that, looking at that case study for Amazon HQ2, them pursuing at the 0.55 FAR level, and then going really above and beyond what the county was requiring, just based on the standards for the Green Building Incentive Program, and kind of going their own route and implementing what they thought in terms of sustainability and renewable energy and those kinds of items.
Great, thank you. Delegate Sullivan, did you want to ask your question?
Typical politician. I'm not sure I have a question, but more of just a statement. First thing I want to do is thank and congratulate these folks from Alexandria and Arlington. It has just been terrific to watch the progress that both those jurisdictions, and I know others around the Commonwealth, have made in this area. Really, really exciting, obviously forward thinking. And I think these are great case studies about what localities can do without having to come begging to Richmond. Now, having said that, and this is, I think it's on topic, but it's a little off. It's a little different approach. The Dillon rule is not, contrary to popular belief, immovable, and I'm always struck every session by the number of bills that come before us, which in one way or another ask us to, lift a restriction for a locality. It can be done. Obviously, there's a lot of politics involved. Depends on what it is. Depends on where it is. Depends on who's asking for it. But it can happen. And while I'm not necessarily volunteering to carry all these bills, I'm happy to talk to anyone who might have needs or ideas. Two come to mind. One is a positive story. One is a negative story. Last year, Fairfax came to me looking for a bill to loosen what they regarded as restrictions or concerns they had that they might not be able to do some things with solar panels on county-owned property. And we were able to get a bill through which specifically enabled that kind of thing. I've taken my lumps on another bill that I've introduced now at least 3 times, maybe even 4. I would very much like to get at least a bill that allows localities to implement benchmarking programs on their existing stock. What we've been talking about is new commercial stock. There are a lot of jurisdictions around the country that have implemented benchmarking programs to what it really does is sort of let the market work its magic on getting building owners to make their buildings more energy efficient. I have run up against a brick wall every time, particularly from the AOBA, the apartment folks, and NAIOP, which is puzzling to me because they live with these programs in lots and lots of other places, but predict doom and gloom should we pass anything like this in Virginia. But I'm going to keep working on that one. Chelsea knows it's something I've been working on, and I'm going to continue to. I do think the General Assembly has made a lot of progress since I've been there, the last decade, on energy efficiency, in the sense that we at least now, we pay attention to it. I can't quite say it's a bipartisan issue yet. We got plenty of problems with this governor's energy plan and what he did, or more importantly, did not put in about energy efficiency. But at least I don't get laughed at the way I used to when I start talking about energy efficiency down in the General Assembly. So anyway, circling back, thank you, Alexandria and Arlington, for what you're doing. You really are leaders in this area, and I'm rooting you on. Keep going.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Sullivan. We have a question from Trey. Is it Biasioli?
Biasioli. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I had to step out briefly, so I didn't capture all the detail. I really appreciated hearing about your experiences up in Northern Virginia. I had a question for Valerie in particular. It seemed like my understanding is the developers need to meet one of those green building standards, but then there are additional criteria that you add on top of that, be it building electrification, EV readiness, solar readiness, things of that sort. Have you considered any discussions with those standard setting organizations to include any of those criteria in a sort of next level standard that you can then go ahead and require, as opposed to adding on your own individual criteria? Just thinking about, as a smaller locality who may want to adopt something similar, if there was something ready-made that we could go ahead and add, some of those measures are things that we would like to add on as well, but having that extra step taken care of could be helpful for those of us.
Rob, are you okay that I answer that question? And you can maybe tag on if you want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I understand what you're saying. One of the reasons that we are doing a revision of the green building policy is we prefer not to rely on so many of the standard conditions because they're not necessarily compulsory. So we end up in a sort of back and forth discussion sometimes, whereas a green building policy, you have to meet those. So in many ways, we don't actually want to continue to do it that way. I would rather embed it. So when we go next year and we do that revision, I'm hoping to make that, bring some of those conditions that we've sort of already agreed on into there and take them out of the condition state so that we understand that that's an expectation that you need to meet. So I don't know if that's answering your question. Rob, do you want to add anything to what I just said?
I guess I just wanted to clarify for the questioner that our conditions actually do get quite specifics. They're measurable, they're targeted. So and we've worked with NAIOP and reached out to various trade organizations to try and establish industry level standards. We're not just sort of shooting out of the dark, with something, so that these standards are quite realistic when we put them in the development approvals. I don't know if that helps clarify what they are. So for instance, electric vehicle charging, we literally say a percentage of a garage needs to either have EV chargers in it or what we call EV ready. And so those percentages and the infrastructure, it's very specific in the condition as to what the developer has to provide as part of their development approval. And it's easy to check whether it's been met or not.
Great. Thanks for your answers.
Other questions, and if I may, Trey, one thing to note, the U.S. Green Building Council, which, as you know, is one of a number of organizations providing certification programs for green buildings and high performance buildings. The U.S. Green Building Council is going through its evolution of its lead for operations and maintenance and building design and construction programs, as of current, releasing what they call their version 5 certification. Does include 1, higher performance thresholds, 2, electrification requirements, 3, electric vehicle charging infrastructure or EV ready. So we are seeing, I think, an industry movement to include kind of these advanced approaches to building performance and design requirements coming into the future, and those are being kind of issued as we speak, and I encourage you to take a look and offer any comments through the USGBC or other organizations who are doing the same.
Excellent. Thanks, Bill.
So other questions, if you could raise your hand, or you feel free to enter your question in the chat, and we can pose those to our panel members. Go ahead and ask a question. Here again, maybe this is a question for both Paul, Rob, and Valerie. Insofar as implementing various green building strategies, whether it be energy efficiency or transit-oriented development, what do you see as the most difficult requirements for developers to achieve as of current, each one of your particular green building programs?
I think I'm going to start with an overall that maybe everyone else can agree with and they can add on to. It's this idea that we've always done it this way. This is business as usual. And so asking them to reconsider like amenities, one of my ones that I just really wish would stop is these fire pits that are everywhere, these gas-fired fire pits. Like, this is an amenity that perhaps was maybe more of interest 40 years ago, maybe not today. Maybe people would like to see, community gardens, a green roof on top of their building, or art, or some sort of interactive kind of experience. And I think that's difficult. It's like, we've always done it this way. We've always used these materials this way. We've always used these vendors this way. Oh, mine's early, sorry. I don't even know how to turn it up. Okay, sorry. 218 and mine already went up, so I guess mine was an early one. But I think that's really important. It's like, there's other systems, there's other materials, there's other ways to look at that. And there is definitely not only an environmental, I mean, obviously climate change is an emergency, but there's also a strong economic case to be made for these things. And so I would like to see them be more open to, wow, my other one went up to 219. No one else, it's only me. That's all I'm talking.
Mine went off, Valerie.
Did it go off? Nobody just heard it. Okay, everyone's went off. So what was it, 220? They were off by 2 minutes. Switzerland, this would not be acceptable. They go to the minute. I'm sorry. If they say the train's coming at 12:02, that train is coming at 12:02. So I think that that's really important. Maybe Paul or Bob can kind of add on to that, but I think we need to sort of think outside of where we've always typically done things and reconsider our systems, our materials, and still it can be within the economic, because they're always developers are going to tell you, I can't afford it. And that sometimes it's really not a strong argument.
Go ahead, Paul, if you have something to add.
Yeah, I'll just hop on, and I echo Valerie's sentiments there and her feedback. It is a challenge when you're changing a program or a policy. I think with Arlington, because we're a voluntary program that developers can opt into, and that we're incentivizing them in some way, shape, or form, that it's always walking a fine line of when you're updating a program, such as ours, that we never want to steer too far of where the green building market may be trending, and we want to be ahead of the curve. But we also don't want to push developers away from opting into our program. So I think it's finding a balance between, okay, how can we update certain standards that we have in the current program, and that, we can push out education and communication and transparency through developers, and to also lead by example as well. I know Bill brought this up in the introduction, but the county has a facility sustainability policy. So I think it's important to, not only, to show developers that we're not just talking the talk, but we're also walking side by side with them in this area of trying to be greener and more sustainable within our own jurisdiction. So, requiring LEED certification for buildings, requiring that they be net zero energy ready when feasible, other things like that. I think it's just, a matter of, it's a balancing act, but certainly, trying to be transparent and communicative through that with the community and the general public is certainly important. So
I wanted to sort of add sort of a sub theme here that I think, it's always the way we've done it, trying to get developers to do something slightly different. But I think a really interesting challenge as I talk to developers is, in this marketplace with higher interest rates, higher labor, all costs have gone up. How do we get developers to invest in tighter building envelopes, better building envelopes? This costs a little bit of extra money up front. And it really is interesting to see the different developers that are going to stay for 30 years versus the developers that are building and then they're selling off. And who's doing the bare minimum versus who is investing for a building that's going to, basically be a better building in 40 years. And so I think, how do we, looking at calibrating our requirements so we do help them do the right thing for our building stock in our communities, but we're constantly trying to push that cost edge and looking at different ways or different materials to help them get a better cost advantage and a better performance advantage. But it's really, the developers are many of them are highly resistant to this, that they've done the same systems for many decades. And I think they need to embrace different metrics and different materials. And in Alexandria, that's not an easy feat. We love our brick, as Bill knows. But we've got to embrace these things if we're going to both make housing affordable and green, because we have to do both at the same time right now. That's kind of our double challenge right now, as we're also facing climate change.
Thank you, Rob, Ballard, and Paul. We have a question from Chelsea Harnish. Paul mentioned bonus density. Can you explain a little further what that means, or provide an example of what that can look like?
Sure. So bonus density in terms of what we're doing is based on height. It's not based on volume of the site plan or area. So you're increasing the height of the building. So for example, we'll use multifamily residential in Arlington. If you have a multifamily residential building and you're going through the Green Building Incentive Program and you're seeking, let's say, 0.25, 0.35 FAR at any level really of the program, you would be adding additional units or increased height in your building for multifamily residential. So you're also gaining, more marketability and more, I would say, financial ability in terms of that increased height as well, because you're able to sell more units or lease more units out. So, putting that in terms of a commercial building, kind of staying the same route there, adding levels and height of where you're leasing to, or wherever it may be. But hopefully that explains and answers that question.
Others have a question, please raise your hand or please use the chat. If you have a question you want to type out, you can read it to the panel members. To help with the discussion, one question I have for Paul, you noted that it's critical for for basically the county to track ongoing energy use and do collect energy use data once a building has been constructed and occupied. How is the county using these data? How is it beneficial for the county to track this information, and how do you use that information to have ongoing dialogue or engagement with the development community?
Yeah, so thanks, Bill. Thanks for that question. That's in reference to our energy benchmarking baseline prerequisite for the Green Building Incentive Program. So that's requiring developers or building owners to provide data or utility data to the county, to our green building staff team, to collect that and provide that data to us so we can track the performance of those private developments. And I guess the caveat to that is that it's only for developments that are opting in voluntarily to that program. So it's not for all site plans going through the county. So we do have a small percentage in lieu of, you know, looking at all site plans in the county of, you know, how many are going through the program. But right now, you know, we're looking at that data and just seeing the trends and how buildings are performing. You know, that's an ongoing exercise that's happening within the county. You know, I think in, you know, maybe the next iteration of the Green Building Incentive Program, we'll see more in-depth detail of, you know, either more requirements that are put on top of the developer for energy benchmarking through this baseline prerequisite, or just to be more transparent in terms of, you know, where this data is going. It's not, you know, just to be transparent, it's not being put out to the public. This is strictly held internally with the county. But again, it's an ongoing exercise of just seeing how buildings are trending and performing to where their predictive energy or models were in the design phase.
If I could, Bill, can I just add on to what Paul just said? It's okay.
Yes.
I also agree getting that data, because it's a lot of like sort of asking permission. Could you please participate? Can you please do these things? Kind of the Dillon rule is that I would love to be able to collect more data from both all the public and private, new and existing, because I'm really trying to, at this point, develop these building typologies, trying to understand what's built out there, and then being able to target programs that really hit the greenhouse gas reductions or really bring in those rebates that would be the most impactful. And without knowing your building stock, without getting that robust information, that database, it's sort of you're hoping that you hit it. And I would prefer really, so when Rip Sullivan said he wanted to do this bill, I'm like 100% behind him, please. We really need that, because it helps us to put together much better green building policies and move forward to achieve the goals that we want.
Great. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Paul. We have two questions. I'll start with Leanne. Like to unmute yourself and ask your question of the panelists.
Hey, everybody. So I am moderating the panel later on rural communities and energy efficiency. And I was just wondering if you had any advice, given the journey that you've gone through, and you all are probably would acknowledge that you're in a community that has fairly good resources in terms of not only financial, but even just number of people that can be working on these programs. If you have any advice about how you could translate some of these programs to a rural setting. I know it's tough. I agree, because I work with a lot of rural schools, and they have very distinct and unique challenges.
Actually, I think. Oh, sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say two things. One, we've talked about a lot of complex things, you know, with these different programs, but I would say that it doesn't have to be complex. You know, you can boil it down to a few simple key standards. In fact, what Valerie said earlier is we're shifting from sort of more broad, complex certification programs to try and be more performance-based and have some key basic metrics that people can hit. So, you know, it doesn't have to be so complicated, but I think we tend to portray it that way sometimes. And I think that would definitely resonate with the rural communities. And number two is green doesn't necessarily have to be more expensive. I think there's this myth in people's minds that it does. It's all about your approach, the materials you use, and the choices that you make. But there are ways to do it where you can have parity with cost. You just have to be creative. And I know rural folks are good at being creative and getting a lot of things done. I've worked in a lot of rural communities. So those are just two things, food for thought.
Yeah, I'm going to add on to what Rob said, is in some ways you have some advantages because geothermal, especially when you get into more dense places like where I came out of New York City, geothermal is extremely challenging to do. But if you really look at case studies, it's one of the easier ways to actually get to net zero. You have space, you have room to actually do these sort of things. I also think it's really important that people say, well, it's more expensive. It doesn't need to be. And also, it's really, though, you have to think about it too. What you build, also, how are you going to maintain and operate it? And those costs seem to be not necessarily connected to the initial construction. If something is passive house, the energy use in that is so low that you get your payback very quickly. It also is something that in a, let's say, a disaster, it can actually last up to 7 days and keep like an internal temperature. We need to have a broader conversations about all the impacts and what do these things bring. And so in rural, yeah, you have more opportunities. You actually have more access to sunlight. You may not necessarily have another building that's, shadowing it. So you should be able to do more solar. Actually, in some ways, you have more opportunities than sometimes the more dense and urban areas do.
Yeah, and I agree with both Robert and Valerie. The sustainability isn't a one size fits all approach, especially in the green building market. So what works in Alexandria, what works in Arlington doesn't necessarily mean that's going to work for a rural community. And I go back to what Robert said previously. You don't have to start where Alexandria or where Arlington are right now in terms of their policies or programs. You can take simple 2 to 3 step approaches. You could look at energy performance, ongoing performance, your operational performance, whatever it may be. Simple green building practices to implement. And I'd also recommend or suggest to speak to your local community and the development community within that area. Speak to your general contractors, speak to your consultants that are working on projects, speak to local commissions that may be in the area in terms of what they're seeing or what they'd like to see in the community. But getting that feedback through public engagement is definitely key, because in Alexandria or in Arlington or anywhere else in a city or area like ours, as government we can say we're going to do this, we're going to do this and this, and we're going to implement it. But if you don't get that key feedback from your stakeholders, you really won't know at the time where you are in terms of a green building market or what you can actually do in your area. So that's definitely important.
Great, and thank you for the question, Leanne, and thank you for the discussion, Robert, Valerie, and Paul. We have about almost 10 minutes left within the panel session before we'll move to about a 15-minute break. Just be aware that Jessica Green from Virginia Energy Efficiency Council will start to move everybody back to the main room in about now 11 minutes, I believe. We have time for maybe one, maybe 2 questions. We left off with Paul and Robert talking about stakeholder engagement, and Alice Bell asked the question about what types of community stakeholder engagement strategies have been effective in engaging with either builders, with development community, individual members of the community, or advocates. How does that stakeholder engagement look for each of your jurisdictions within the context of developing or implementing green building policies? And maybe I'll start with Robert and Valerie and then move to Paul thereafter.
Okay. I would say with planning broadly, we're moving towards methods where we're basically going out to the stakeholders. We have, and we try and do sort of array of different outreach efforts. So different people will have different avenues to provide their opinions and thoughts to us. But some of the more recent things we've been doing are going out doing the focus group interviews, pop-up events at farmers markets, grocery stores, or other community fair-like events. We always have an online social media presence for people that can't come out to events to filter things back to us based on things that are posted throughout the process. So there's those broad sets of things that we do, not only with green building, but all of our planning efforts in the city. I would say with green building, and given that there are sort of business and technical elements, we have convened task forces and done more specialized work with NAOP and other specific groups, targeting groups to try and get opinion and expert testimony and just, brainstorming. How do we solve these things? We get some really good ideas from industry as to how to pragmatically work at developing our policies. So those are some of the basics and the things that we're currently doing in Alexandria.
I'm going to say we recently initiated and worked with the libraries to do parking day to kind of get people to come out and realize, we talk about climate change. It always seems like gloom and doom. We actually have fun out there. We sat in chairs. You have to be positive and try to actually do something. You can't let it just stop you from moving forward. And we always use the all of the above approach, right? We're going to use social media. We're going to use flyers. We're going to use whatever we can to talk to people. So we tag on. The pop-ups are wonderful. And as we do into the green building policy, obviously we're going to have a lot of community engagement. And Rob and I actually were shooting around an idea this morning. We're probably not at liberty to talk about it yet, but something to help educate, to get people to understand. We made that comment about not doing business as usual. Well, what is our response? Is we're probably going to try to do something to say, hey, these are the different things that are out there. These are the possibilities. And obviously, whenever you come back from Greenbuild, you come back with lots of ideas, which is exactly what I did.
Yeah, for Arlington, they have a pretty extensive and thorough public engagement process through any policy or program that you may be implementing or proposing out to the community. Actually, a 6-step process. So kind of identifying your project stakeholders, your level of engagement, and then what the strategies are moving forward, all the way through, implementing that final proposal or policy. In terms of the Green Building Incentive Program, I know last year, or sorry, not last year, but during the last update, so the current 2020 program, they did bring a cohort of people together. So a mixture from MEPs to green building consultants to architects to the development community, you name it, general contractors, and bring them together to work and to provide ideas that they have for what is now the current iteration of the program. As Bill mentioned before, both Alexandria and Arlington are going through an update of their program and policy. And right now, it's really, again, based on following those steps of, you bring in external stakeholders, you speak with them, you get their ideas, their feedback on the current program, what they're proposing, where they see the green building market heading. Then you have that internal stakeholder engagement. So you go through the county or city if you're in Alexandria. And then you also go through a public comment period. So you let the community engage with what you're proposing, and you gather their feedback, and you really do go through all of their comments and listen to the things that they have to say and what they would like to see within the county, whether that's just in terms of general sustainability or when you're looking at something specific like the green building program. So it's definitely extensive, and but it's worthwhile, and you need that, again, you need that public engagement to really gear down on what you're proposing and where the community's mindset is.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, so there's time for one question. I see that Trey has his hand up. Trey, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure thing, Bill. I appreciate the insight on everybody's work thus far. Some of the larger municipalities in the country are starting to work on the existing building stock and ways to incentivize or require energy efficiency improvements. Is that a space that anybody any of the presenters are working on outside of buildings that are going through a redevelopment or something like that.
I mean, I can talk about that. I just came from New York City, and right now New York City is probably one of the most aggressive in addressing climate change, and sort of a stark contrast to what I face here in Virginia. And Local Law 97 was just passed, which has some very strict requirements in terms of carbon emissions and penalties that are basically levied. That will start in July of next year. And the way to do that, and this applies to all buildings, not just new buildings, which is normally what we're restricted to. So they're very much involved in it, which, I mean, they have so many local laws that do benchmarking, they do energy grades, and that's been going on for a long time. So that is why I so much support getting that information, because I see how valuable that is, so they can target and they know exactly how it's going to impact what buildings, how they could have made concessions. Their rulemaking was very, very detailed. And so I definitely, this is a city that to pay attention to in terms of that, how they're handling it.
Yeah, I think the existing building sector plays such an important role in when you're looking at something like calculating GHG emissions or lowering your carbon for a community or city. You can't just focus on new construction development within your jurisdiction. When you're dealing with buildings that may be older and need, upgraded efficiency standards, new equipment or upgraded equipment, anything along those measures, that plays into effect, and it lowers your emissions overall as you're going through your goals. So it's just it's an ongoing conversation within the county. It's definitely become more of an evolving topic to bring about. I was just at Greenbuild last week. Valerie and Robert, fortunate that we didn't get to run into each other. But there was so much conversation about, the existing building market and adaptive reuse and retrofitting and embodied carbon in existing buildings and what you're doing. So again, it's a key topic right now, and we're aware of it. And it's an ongoing conversation.
I would just say sort of two things. It really is a Virginia. I'm not seeing where we can mandate with the existing building stock these changes. We're going to have to work with the building code. And as people make modest renovations and different things, hopefully we can make progress on that front. But it's definitely an area that we need to use more carrots than sticks right now. So I know Valerie's going to be working on some of those carrots in Alexandria. How do we entice people to put in new HVAC systems and other sustainability measures that make economic sense at the right time? But how do we, help incentivize those things? That's kind of where, at least in the city of Alexandria, it feels like we are.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending today's discussion on implementing green building policies here in Virginia and our Dillon rural states. I want to extend my gratitude to Paul, Rob, and Valerie for serving as panel members and sharing their respective stories from Arlington County and the city of Alexandria and the experiences they've all had in implementing green building policies. And then thank you all for attending and offering really thoughtful questions to our panelists to help make for a really thoughtful and a robust discussion this afternoon. We're going to be proceeding to a 15-minute break.